Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here or there. I'm not sure which one I should use. I will make you disappear too. I'm sorry about this. So in this presentation, we'll talk about building specialized resources based on FrameNet, and we've applied this to the field of the environment. So I will be presenting, but this is joint work. I'm collaborating with Benoit Robichaud from the University of Montreal and Carlos Subirats from the Universidad Autónoma de Barcelona. An increasing number of people are referring to or refer to frame semantics or FrameNet for the development of domain-specific resources. Various projects have been launched in different areas of knowledge, and these projects can have different objectives. Some of them lead to standalone resources based on FrameNet. One specific resource, Ecolexicon, refers to frame semantics in general, but the team developed its own specific methodology. And finally, some projects are interested in increasing the coverage of general FrameNets by adding specialized terms. Now, why are frame semantics and FrameNet interesting for domain-specific resources? So one very general way to answer this question would be to say that in fact, to understand a domain-specific concept, you need to see to which other concepts this first concept is linked, or if we want to express this in a more frame semantics way, we could say that understanding domain-specific concepts involves background knowledge. But of course, the kind of background knowledge needed to approach specialized knowledge is probably different from the one we need to deal with everyday situations. Now, typically, designers of specialized or domain-specific resources, the typical solution that they propose is to account for knowledge organization with very abstract knowledge representations, such as the one I reproduced here on the slide. This is a snapshot of the ENVO ontology, and it shows how habitat is linked to other concepts in this field with the relation that appears here is a relation. Now these representations are very abstract, and paradoxically, many of these designers acquire or extract knowledge from running text from corpora. And perhaps this is where frame semantics and FrameNet come in, because they give us, they provide us with principles and a methodology to account for knowledge, the conceptual structure of knowledge. They also allow us to account for the linguistic properties of terms, of the lexical units that are used to express knowledge. And finally, they allow us to connect these two descriptive levels. So given this very short background, this is the outline of the talk. I will say a few things about the challenges that we are faced with when we develop domain-specific FrameNets. Then I'll give a quick overview of our methodology. Of course, it is based on FrameNet, but we needed to adapt some of its some steps. And in this talk, I'll try to focus on the steps that are different from the FrameNet methodology. So I will use examples from the field of the environment, and these examples are taken from a resource that we are developing called the Framed Dico-Enviro, that contains terms in 6 different languages. Now, when developing domain-specific FrameNets, we are confronted with a certain number of situations. The first one is a situation where the lemmas used or the terms used are unknown, but also the concept they express is also unknown. So an example was given in the field of mathematics by Fillmore and Baker, but I will comment an environmental example. Eutrophication, in French we say eutrophisation. For me, this was a new term, completely new, and the concept behind it, I had no idea before I started looking at the corpora on the water pollution. Then a second situation is a situation that might be a little more common, is the situation where the lemmas themselves, the terms are known, but the concept behind them are new. Okay? So this applies, for instance, to clean, that acquires in the field of the environment a new meaning, and also to bus in computer science. And the third situation, and this is probably the situation that is most difficult to handle, it's a situation where the concepts themselves are more or less known, the terms are known, but the perspective taken on these concepts can be different when considered from the point of view of a specialized area of knowledge. Fillmore gave an example of this with innocent and guilty, and explained that in everyday language, innocent refers to a person who has not committed a crime. But from the perspective of law, innocent will refer to a person who has not been proven guilty after a long procedure. So we have similar examples in the field of the environment. So for instance, cases where the perspective taken in the environment differs from a perspective that could be more that could be associated with everyday language, like introduce. But we also have cases where a distinction is made within the environment, and this distinction could possibly be relevant only in this area of knowledge. So, for instance, with the verb hunt, when looking at hunt in a corpus on endangered species, we notice that a first hunt refers to an activity where a meat eater, a species, catches animals to survive. And considering this meaning, this hunt could appear in the same lexical paradigm as to prey, predation, and predator. Now, hunt is also used to refer to an activity carried out by men for many different kinds of reasons. And this activity can pose a threat to species. And in this case, hunt would find itself in the same lexical paradigm as poaching, capture, and fish. Now, developing domain-specific FrameNets also raise a certain number of methodological issues. I will just mention a few. We ran into some cases where the situation that we needed to describe, the environmental situation, corresponded to something that was already described, or more or less corresponded to something that was already described in the Berkeley FrameNet. But even so, the lexical contents, even if the situations are very similar, the lexical contents are very different. So the list in the example given here is with the residence frame. So the list in the Berkeley FrameNet is much longer than what we could see in our environmental corpora. We also needed to create new frames, and this is a simple example. So for instance, we could refer to the animals frame in FrameNet to account for a certain number of terms that appeared in our corpora. But we also needed to create new frames to account for different perspectives taken on animals. So for instance, we have a frame that described the perspective taken on animals according to their development, another one according to reproduction, and so on. Now, the last methodological issue that I would like to mention is the fact that even if we can refer to existing frames like ingestion, residence, or self-motion, we still want to link these frames in a way that is significant or relevant from the point of view of the environment. And the end result is that the relations will offer a different picture when compared to the ones that are that appear in FrameNet. So this is a quick, an overview of our methodology, the different steps that we carry out. I would like to mention here that our methodology is bottom up. We are not experts in any of the fields we work on. We need to rely on specialized corpora to know which terms are used, also to know how experts talk about these terms, how they manage, how they present these concepts. The first 5 steps allow us to compile terminological entries, and these are encoded in a resource that we call Zico Enviro. And when we work on these first 5 steps, we work on languages, different languages independently. Now, the last 3 steps are concerned with all the finding frame and defining them. And in this case, when we reach these steps, we can work on 1 or 2 languages at the same time. Now, once these frames are defined, they are encoded in a resource called Frame Zico Enviro, and these 2 resources are linked, so we can go from one to the other. So the first step, as I said, is consistent compiling a corpus. We compile, this is something that terminologists must do. We compile a specific corpora for each topic. The environment is very broad and covers many different topics. And we do this for each language. So we have a Chinese corpus on climate change, a Spanish corpus on climate change, and so on. When we start with about 500,000 words, and then we can enrich the corpora at a later stage. So our corpora contain, we try to focus on scientific literature, governmental reports, things that are written by experts. So once we have this corpus, we will send it to a term extraction system called Thermostat that was developed by a colleague of mine. And the system compares our specialized corpus to a reference corpus, and it will rank lemmas according to a specificity scores, which gives us a clue about the specific nature of the units of the lemmas that are used in our specialized corpus. Now, this is an example of the kinds of results we can obtain. This is the result of the submission of a corpus on endangered species. And the results are pretty good, but of course they must be validated by terminologists. So we go down the list. Some of these candidates will have to be removed. Now the next step, once we selected the terms that will appear in our resource, we select contexts and annotate them. So at this stage, we will need to make meaning distinctions. Of course, polysemy is reduced in a specialized corpus when compared to a general one, but there is still polysemy in a specialized corpora. We select between 15 and 20 contexts for meaning. We realized that beyond 20 contexts, there was too much redundancy, too much effort put in annotation that was not necessarily useful. When selecting contexts, we try to select a variety of structures. We try to select contexts in which frame elements will be realized differently. And we annotate in an XML file. So here you have a view of the file in which the annotators work, the XML. so on the left-hand side, and on the right-hand side, you have the view online, so in HTML. So once we selected terms, we annotated context, we obtained we have terminological entries in different languages. So here you can see examples in English, French, Portuguese, and Chinese. So among these terminological entries, what we try to do then is find possible frames and then encode them. We refer to the criteria given in the book, but our discovery is still very bottom up. So we start by locating terms that have the same number of frame elements, core frame elements, the same kinds of frame elements. And we also look at the annotations to see if some of the non-core frame elements are similar. Okay, so we can start. So once we see, this is a very simple example of terms that have one core frame element, but still we can, it shows how a little bit how we work. So for the English terms, we can also compare the content of our database to the content of the Berkeley FrameNet, the XML output of the Berkeley FrameNet. So this helps us identify some terms that could possibly appear in the Berkeley FrameNet and to see if their description is similar, if the situation that we're dealing with in the environment is similar. And then we define frames. Again, we refer to relations that are described in FrameNet. But as I said, we try to integrate them into something that is that means something from the point of view of the environment. So here you have an example. I showed an example earlier with species activities, but here you have an example with activities carried out by human beings, as we can see them in our corpora. So human beings manufacture, develop things, use resources. So to sum up, of course, this is ongoing work. This slide shows you what we have done so far in terms of annotations, in terms of lexical units that appear in frames. In terms of frames as well, you can see that more than half the frames are new. You can also see that the coverage varies a lot from one language to another, since some of these projects started a little later. So again, this is ongoing work. We're still adding terms. We're adding terms to frames. We're also creating new frames. What we would like to do in the future would be to make a better connections with general FrameNets. As you saw, our annotation methods, our tools are different from the one used in FrameNet projects. Some of you might have noticed too that the labels that we use for frame elements are not compatible with FrameNet. So this part of this work, we could try to align our methodology a little bit more with that of FrameNet, and part of this could be done automatically. And finally, we would like to see how we could use this work to increase the coverage of general FrameNets. So thank you very much, and I will listen to your questions and comments.